Welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to share this series of episodes with you. We are going through all the seasons of life and NFP use or fertility awareness use in those seasons. So today we are starting with charting during adolescence. We're going to be going through charting during postpartum, charting when you're newlywed, charting during perimenopause. We're going to be going through all of the seasons of life. And so we're starting here with adolescence. Obviously, this isn't an NFP use type episode, but we're going to be talking about charting during this season because this is a season I really encourage charting during. And so without further ado. Hey there, welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, where we're expanding the natural family planning conversation. I'm your host, Ellen Holloway. All right, everyone, we are welcoming Hanna Cox to the podcast today. Hanna is going to be sharing with us some ideas and tips and tricks and reasons why for charting during kind of the adolescent phase of life or kind of the adolescent phase of your cycle. And so this is part of the larger series that we have of charting and using NFP during different seasons of life. In this podcast episode, we're going to be using the terms charting and fertility awareness because NFP does not apply because this is charting during a season when you're definitely not married. Well, I hope not. That's like really, really young. And so, so normally on the podcast, we use the term NFP, but we're going to be using fertility awareness and charting because that is what applies to this season of life. NFP, as we define it on this podcast, is the use of a fertility awareness-based method alongside prayer and discernment with your spouse. So therefore, that's the reason why it's not really applicable to this particular season of life. Anyway, all that to say, welcome, Hanna.
Thank you.
Hanna, could you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, my name is Hanna Cox. I live in central Nebraska with my husband and our 5 kids. And I grew up probably like most women, not really understanding much about my cycle, not learning a whole lot in school about it other than how to prevent it. I just remember in sex ed, this huge list of birth control options. And that's really was kind of the priority for what they were teaching us back then.
Yeah.
My mom didn't talk a whole lot about it. She gave me this book to read about the birds and the bees, and it was kind of awkward. I read it, and she asked if I had questions, and no, I didn't have questions because I didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So I really didn't know anything about my cycle or charting until after I was married. I was actually pregnant with my 3rd before I heard about it from a friend, and I was really fascinated, and I got online and just started researching on my own about cycle charting, and it was so amazing to me. It seemed so common sense, especially I was looking at the medical part of it, all the medical applications for healing your body and healing your cycle. My friend was actually going through that. They were going through infertility. I just became so fascinated by it. I immediately just felt this call to teach it. So I've been trained in the Creighton model. And after teaching so many couples, especially couples struggling with infertility, the one thing that always came up was, why didn't I know about this when I was younger? Why don't they teach this in school? I feel like this is something every girl should learn. And so that kind of led me to, I do think girls should learn this. And I have 3 daughters of my own, and I've just learned so much about myself and my body, and I've come to appreciate my fertility and my cycle so much just through charting. And I really want that for my girls. So I went through the FEM and Teen FEM program to become an instructor for that also a couple of years ago. So now I'm teaching Teen FEM to girls, and I've made a course all online to make it more convenient for people. But that's kind of where I'm at right now.
That's fantastic. And so one of the things that I think you really talk about is like having moms and daughters learn together and working on this together. Because like one of the things you mentioned is like your mom didn't really talk to you about it. She just handed you a book, and then it was really, really awkward. And I had a very similar situation too. My mom didn't really talk to me about it. And so then I didn't want to talk to my mom about it. And so I just want to highlight that because I think it's so important for moms and daughters to, have this conversation together so that particularly the daughters are comfortable then coming to mom and saying, hey, I do have some questions, or I feel like something's a little bit off, or, something like that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's what I encourage moms to go through the program with their daughter. And so that mom becomes the guide through those teen years and through puberty and all these changes. And I was the same way. I didn't want to go to my mom because she was obviously kind of embarrassed to talk about it. And it's daunting. My oldest daughter is 8. She's almost 9, but I can see she's starting needing to wear a bra.
Mm-hmm.
She's got some BO going on. So, I've tried to use that as kind of a starting point to saying, these are some of the changes that are starting to happen. And we've just started kind of talking about periods lately, and her first thing she said was, well, that's gross. I don't really want to do that. Yeah, but the conversation has started. So
that's fantastic. And she's 8. How fabulous that the
yes.
conversation has started. And it started in an age appropriate way, right? It's not like you've started telling her about, the Creighton model or FEM and like how to chart and to avoid pregnancy. Like she doesn't need to know that right now. But, helping her be prepared, feel more confident for the changes that are coming. And I mean, I don't think there's a single woman out there whose first thought wasn't, "Ooh, that's gross. I don't want to do that." Like when they complain about periods, I was like, I don't want to do that. Can I avoid that? And, and so then that's where our culture comes in with like, oh yeah, you can just skip it. But we all know that that's not a healthy thing to do. We do want to have our cycle. We do want to have a period. And we want to have a true period, not a breakthrough bleeding. But to be able to walk into that season of life, walk into the season of adolescence, and starting cycling with the knowledge that this is normal, this is healthy, this is good, and being prepared with the tools to be able to, start some initial charting type things, and we'll get into this. I'm starting to go off on a bit of a tangent, but let's first just kind of define what we're talking about when we mean adolescence, because I think there's sort of two things that might come to mind. Adolescence in the terms of like, oh, someone who's like 10 to 13 years old, or like maybe 9 to 13 or something like that. So we're not really talking about age per se on this podcast episode. We're more talking about the period of time when a young woman or kind of girl, whatever you want to call them at that age, gets her first period, gets her first cycle, and that period of time that it takes for that cycle to regulate. It is very normal for the first several years of cycling to be totally out of whack. And that is something that I think as a culture, we don't know very much. Which is really unfortunate.
Yes.
Do you want to speak to that? I feel like you're like, showing me at the bit. You're like, I want to say something.
I've had so many moms reach out and just asking, well, what's normal at this age? When should she start? I've had moms say, well, my daughter's 16 and she hasn't started yet. I've had other moms tell me we should go see a doctor because this isn't normal. But I was able to tell her, girls can start as old as 16, and looking at what other things have started to happen in puberty. It starts with, breast developing, and then pubic hair, and then you start, say having the BO and acne and some of this other stuff. If she's got signs that the other puberty has started, then it's kind of a timeline there for when her period should start. And then sure enough, her period started at 16 and everything's okay. But yeah, those first few years after your first period, girls' cycles are not going to be normal. And it's okay. It's your body is just starting to communicate, your brain and your ovaries are starting to communicate, and it takes a little time. So no, you don't need to go to the doctor. You don't need to, take their recommendations to get on birth control to regulate anything. That's the last thing we need to do. Usually, girls just need time for things to regulate. And
right.
Just knowing that can ease everyone's mind.
It's your body, learning something completely new. Like think about a baby who learns to walk. Like they don't just stand up one day and start walking. There's usually kind of this process of kind of pulling themselves up, and then they might walk a little bit holding on to something. And then they might take their first one step, and then they might take 3 steps in a row, but then they might go back to holding on to everything and walking and not take steps on their own. And, so it's this process of learning. And that's the same thing our body is doing. Like a young girl might experience like 3 cycles in a row that are, maybe about 25 days long. And that's pretty typical. And then all of a sudden she doesn't get a period for like 3 months. That's okay. Like your body is figuring it out, and it's ebbing and flowing. And I think the biggest thing to say is you don't need to get on birth control to regulate your cycles, because it's not going to regulate your cycles at all.
Yes. So it is important for moms to know what's normal, to be able to help their daughters through that. In the same breath, there are a lot of girls who have cycle issues and hormone issues that do need help. They do need some medical help. So kind of knowing when that irregular cycle is too much, or when that cramping is too much, or when the bleeding is too heavy, is really important to know when you need to get your daughter some help.
Right. Also. That's such a good point, is that, so we're saying, all these things are normal, but there are things that aren't normal. Can you speak to a couple of those things, like some of the biggest red flags that might be like something you would want to look into?
First of all, with your period, if the bleeding is lasting more than 7 days, or if it's too heavy, I would have to look. There's some guidelines on how heavy is too much, especially if you're getting, you feel like you're getting dizzy, you're getting headaches during your period. That's probably low iron. It's just too much. So if the bleeding's too heavy, or if the cramping, if there's cramping and pain that's really disrupting your normal life, disrupting, what you want to do in your life, that's day to day, that's too much. Or PMS, mood swings and all those symptoms that can happen before your period. If it's more than 3 days worth before your period starts, that's too much. And so charting can really help girls to see how their cycle actually is, actually get it out on a chart, on a piece of paper, and see what her cycle looks like. How many days of bleeding do I have? How heavy it is? Is it? Do I see signs of ovulation? How long is my luteal phase? And then I always encourage girls to chart their emotions and any symptoms they're feeling on their chart, so they can go back and see, I had a whole week worth of feeling moody and depressed. Well, that's probably too much.
Yeah.
It gives the girls a lot of awareness for what's going on in their body.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I wish that I had been taught to chart, even just some basic fundamentals, when I was, in junior high school. I don't exactly remember when I got my period, but at whatever point that was, it just would have been great to be able to, see what was going on and even have a little bit of anticipation of like, okay, this is, I'm probably going to get my period next week. And,
Mm-hmm.
and then I can kind of know like, okay, well, I thought maybe I was going to get my period this week, but, okay, maybe this is a longer cycle. But if I was charting signs of fertility, then I would know, what was normal, what was not. And so, yeah, I just think how empowering for young girls
Yes.
to be able to have that in their back pocket. So let's talk about we've already kind of mentioned some of them, but what are some of the most difficult aspects of charting during this season?
Um, First of all, sometimes the girls may just not be real interested in it. If their friends aren't doing anything like this, and it's kind of hard to talk about periods and all this, some girls just may not be real interested. And that's where mom is really important. Her being aware that, you understanding your body and your cycle and your fertility and how your hormones are changing, this is really important. And I want you to learn this. Even if she's just learning the basics, like you talked, that, how her hormones are changing, that she's going to see mucus, closer to ovulation, and that those hormone changes are really going to affect her mood and her energy and all these things. Having a basic understanding of that is so empowering and will really give her a head start in the future, when she's a woman, when she's married, or maybe she's looking for a method of avoiding pregnancy. Just knowing that option is out there, because I had no idea, even though I grew up Catholic, I didn't know anything about it. And I really didn't understand why, birth control was bad.
Agreed.
So,
I have
yeah.
like the same exact experience.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible. And I
Yeah.
think something else that can be like difficult about maybe not specifically charting about the season of life, but like difficult about cycling during the season of life is that our society is so obsessed with quote regulating your cycle and having
Mm-hmm.
that like 28-day cycle. And so when a young woman gets her first period and then maybe doesn't get another period for like 45 days or something, she immediately thinks that something's wrong. And like any kind of typical doctor would think that, would say that. And so I think that's a really difficult aspect of this period of time, just because society doesn't understand that there is this like learning process amount of time for your body to go through, and that's completely normal and it's completely okay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. In our societies, it's kind of a taboo subject. So, if mom's not talking about it, she's going to learn from her friends and the internet and whatever her teacher and, health class tells her. So that's why it's so important for mom and dad too, to just be there and start that conversation so that she can feel comfortable coming to them with questions, and really seeing her mom or her parents as her guide, and the one that can really help her through this.
Absolutely.
So,
I think that's so
yes.
key. So, one of the things that you mentioned is like just young girls like not being all that interested in charting. And so I wanted to know, what are kind of some tips or suggestions that you have
Mm-hmm.
maybe for moms with daughters that aren't super interested in this aspect of their body? And like how do you encourage them or share that information when they want nothing to do with it?
Yeah. And I should add, it can seem, the girls at first can think, this is kind of weird, I'm not sure I want to do this. But then often once they do start learning about all of this, learning about her cycle and her hormones, and actually charting and tracking her own cycle, then it becomes much more relevant to them and much more interesting, because they're suddenly learning so much about themselves. It's not just learning something abstract. They're actually observing their own body and learning about their own cycle and their own hormones and mood and all of that. So really just getting them started is a big part of it, and help her find what her own motivation for charting is. I talk about this with the older, adult women that I teach, but also it's just as important for teens. What is your motivation for charting? Is it, do you want to get medical help for, that heavy bleeding or cramping that you're having? Or do you just want to know when your period's going to start each cycle? That's a big thing. They've actually done studies, or I've heard of studies where by the third cycle of charting, girls are suddenly like so empowered by like being able to predict when their period starts, and then it actually starts when they expect it to. And it's eye-opening and it's empowering for them. And they're suddenly like owning it. Like, yeah, I can do this. This makes sense. And like, I understand myself now. And there's just so much confidence that comes with that.
I am honestly getting chills with you saying that, because I'm thinking back to myself in high school when my period would legitimately surprise me, and it would be embarrassing if I was in a situation where I didn't have the appropriate products that I needed, or, had to ask a friend or, something like that, or had to like step out of class in the middle of class because I was like, oh shoot,
Yes.
But had I had the tools at my disposal that I do now, to be able to really predict with very high confidence, within a couple of days when my period would start, that would have been so incredibly helpful for me as a teen. I wouldn't have felt so embarrassed about my period and my cycle. And yeah, I just would have felt so much more confident in having that knowledge and being able to predict that. And also you just kind of, I feel like sometimes I feel like a total boss when I'm like, I'm pretty sure my period's going to start on Monday, and then it starts on Monday. I'm like,
yeah,
amazing.
Yeah, you're totally right. One other thing you can do to help your girls is just kind of let them do it at their own pace. Some girls want to be super diligent about, making observations and charting. Other girls, maybe they want to do it just a little more loosely and maybe check once a day, or, so it's okay. Don't push them to the point where they're going to resent it or be tired of it. Kind of let them do it at their own pace. Just introducing them to the charting, and so that they can begin to notice their body and understand what's going on. That's a huge head start for them.
Absolutely. Well, and I've even heard from other, women who kind of work in the same space that you do, of just empowering like teens and young adults to chart, is starting with just period tracking, just starting with that aspect. And then, after a couple of cycles, then taking another step and then saying, okay, well, now why don't you chart your mood every day as well? And then, okay, well, now why don't you, keep an eye on when you're going to the bathroom. And if you see mucus, make a little note, and just like taking those little baby steps. Because again, at this point in their life, it's for knowledge. They're not actively trying to avoid pregnancy. And so, they don't have to be charting with the diligence that, someone who's trying to avoid would need to be charting with. And so you can take those little baby steps. And so I just think that's such a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other tips, or actually a secondary question to this, is what kind of tips do you have for moms to like start the conversation? You already sort of mentioned how you've started it with your daughter, but can you just kind of lay those out for us a little bit?
Yeah. I really encourage starting when they're young, even, toddlers. And one thing you can do just really simply is just don't try so hard to hide your own periods. Kids are really curious, and if they follow you into the bathroom and they're asking questions, it's okay to just explain, yeah, mommy bleeds for a little bit each month and I'm not hurt, and it's normal for mommies. And it just kind of opens it up as, oh, okay, that's normal. It's okay. And, if they ask questions, just answer honestly. My kids, when I was pregnant with my last baby, they're asking questions about, how does the baby get out and about nursing. And it's okay to just be kind of honest and use real terms and start to explain some of that. So it's not so strange for them when they get older and start hearing about this.
Absolutely. Well, and I think when we straight out use the real terms, then it doesn't become this taboo topic. I think many of us as moms, I would say like all moms, would want their daughters to come to them when they have questions about sex and about their cycles and about things like that. And so if we can start at a young age, just being like, look, this is a part of life. This is something that happens in our life. This is something that we can talk about. This is something you can talk to me about, and I'm happy to talk to you about. Obviously, we're not going to share like illicit details with our children, but yeah, I love that. Just being open, answering questions honestly, and not trying to hide your charting stuff. Leave your thermometer out on the side table, leave your chart out if you chart with paper, leave your monitor out, or whatever tools you're using for charting, or if you're like me and your 2-year-old follows you to the bathroom every day, like, and they ask you, why are you looking at the toilet paper, like explain why you're looking at the toilet paper, and they'll be really interested in it because they're 2 and everything's interesting.
Yeah. And they'll just say, oh, okay. And that's it.
That's a part of life. Yeah. And then, oh my gosh, I mean, what a beautiful thing if a young girl was just to kind of grow up with that just being a normal part of life. And then when they get to cycling themselves, it's not just this like mind altering, world crushing thing that happens. It's just like, oh yeah, well, a mom went through that. So now it's my turn. Like, okay, now I get to do it. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
Fabulous. Hanna, you have shared so many great, just tips and suggestions for, moms and daughters, charting. Was there anything else that you wanted to share before we close out this podcast episode?
Just that I did make a guide for anyone who wants to download it. It's a guide for just introducing your daughter to her body and to charting. And it goes through the different ages from, what you can do when your daughter's still really young to when she's hitting puberty and even after she's started getting periods. So I'll give you, Ellen, the link for that. You can put it below this podcast.
Yeah. So that will be in the show notes, and also a link to Hanna's Instagram is going to be in the podcast as well. If you want to, or in the show notes, this is the podcast. If you want to reach out to her too. So yeah.
All right.
Well, Hanna, thank you so much for being here.
Yes. Thank you. It's been great.
Thanks so much for listening. Again, this is the first episode in a huge series that we're doing, 9 different episodes going through all of the seasons of life. I'm really excited to share this whole series with you. I've been working on it for like 9 months to get this series out for you. Finally, all of the puzzle pieces have come together. Next week, get excited for charting as a single woman. This is going to be a great episode to share with your single friends that you're like, hey, you should start charting. It'll be a really great episode for that. So definitely check out next week's episode. Again, if you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. Until next time.